Greetings, Imagination Connoisseurs. Welcome to this 275th episode of Robservations, the show about something. I bid all of you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community, welcome. All of you Imagination Connoisseurs. It's a good day to be here today, and as always, these chats, these shows, they're brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And as you know, if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com, you can punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity. This community, don't say I never did anything for you, and you get 20% off your order. Also, remember, if you go to the website, theburnettwork.net, and you comment on anything, any story there, your own letter, it doesn't matter, you get entered into our giveaway for a bottle of Lucky Tiger body wash, from head to tail body wash. And it's quite delightful. And we're going to give out one a week until the 300th episode of Robservations. Unfortunately, it's only open to North America. But hey, you can win free Lucky Tiger product. What's wrong with that? That's a good thing. Well, welcome to today's 275th episode of the show about something. That's what Robservations is. You know, I was over on Twitter earlier, getting insulted, getting trolled. I always find it really interesting. If you mention and tag President Trump in anything, it goes from you're talking about impeachment hearings to suddenly it veers over to Israel and I'm a fatty who wants to run away to Tel Aviv. It's so funny. It's like, well, at least I have a passport. That's what I think. But anyway, it got me thinking about science fiction, as trolling on Twitter usually does. I mean, I think, we kind of live in a science fiction world, but I've always taken solace in science fiction literature, even dystopian science fiction literature, because I find it all relatively uplifting. And it got me thinking about, once again, what is science fiction? What is it? What do people think about it? And when you do that, when you start thinking about science fiction, you can't help but want to get people's definitions. Like, what is science fiction? And there's always a few that I come back to. There's things I come down to, like Theodore Sturgeon, who wrote episodes of the original Star Trek. In 1952, he said, "A science fiction story is a story built around human beings, with a human problem and a human solution, which would not have happened at all without its scientific content." Thought that was pretty interesting. Robert Heinlein, in 1959, said, "Realistic speculation about possible future events, based solidly on adequate knowledge of the real world, past and present, and on through understanding of the nature and significance of the scientific method. To make this definition cover all science fiction instead of almost all, it is necessary only to strike out the word future." Kingsley Amis said in 1960, "Science fiction is that class of prose narrative treating of a situation that could not arise in the world we know, but which is hypothesized on the basis of some innovation in science or technology, or pseudoscience or pseudotechnology, whether human or extraterrestrial in origin." One of my favorites, actually could be my favorite of all, was Brian Aldiss, which I've said before. Brian Aldiss, who said in 1973, "Science fiction is the search for a definition of man and his status in the universe, which will stand in our advanced but confused state of knowledge or science." I love that. I thought that's a great definition of science fiction. I've always thought it was a good definition of science fiction. Isaac Asimov said, "Science fiction can be defined as that branch of literature which deals with the notion of human beings to changes in science and technology." I thought that's a pretty good one too. Rod Serling in 1962 said, "Fantasy is the impossible made probable. Science fiction is the improbable made possible." Now, I was thinking about this too, because it was announced that Lisa Joy and Jonathan Nolan have sold their first series to Netflix, which is based on William Gibson's novel Peripheral, which is a very interesting book. And I think that it's very exciting to me because William Gibson is one of the fathers, I think, of modern science fiction, really, he coined the term cyberpunk. His 1984 novel Neuromancer was so influential that it's good to see him being adapted into a TV series. I can't wait. I would have thought Neuromancer, Count Zero, and Mona Lisa Overdrive would have come to us first, but maybe they're too quaint now. So Peripheral, which is one of his very latest works, is getting adapted by Jonathan Nolan and Miss Joy, who are coming off of Westworld. So that's very exciting. Very exciting. And, I just was like, I Google search about science fiction, and this came up by Jenna Avery. And this little article, Sci-Fi Circuit, The Purpose and Value of Science Fiction. And it was from Script magazine, an online magazine. And this was dated June 14th, 2013. So 6 years ago. Now, I don't think this is necessarily profound, but I kind of like this because it was very simple. I thought it was great. And I'm going to read it. Does sci-fi serve a purpose beyond that of entertainment or escapism? Why do we write, read, and love science fiction? Arthur C. Clarke said, there's no real objection to escapism in the right places. We all want to escape occasionally, but science fiction is often very far from escapism. In fact, you might say that science fiction is escape into reality. It's a fiction which does concern itself with real issues, the origin of man, our future. In fact, I can't think of any form of literature which is more concerned with real issues, reality. I've always thought that's true. Arthur C. Clarke, of course, collaborated with Stanley Kubrick to create 2001. He also wrote one of my favorite science fiction novels, Childhood's End. It was adapted a couple of years back. It was all right. An adaptation of its great First Contact story. Another Arthur C. Clarke book that I liked, Imperial Earth. And of course, he wrote 2010, which I maintain you could remake 2010 today. You might have to call it 2020 or maybe 2050. Just put it ahead a little bit. And you can just make it more like the book. But Keir Dullea is still around, so you could still make that remake. I'd love to do that, actually. I'd love to remake 2010. Here are some thoughts on the important role sci-fi plays in our culture. Number one, science fiction makes us think, wonder, and ask, what if and why? And this is, of course, we're back to Jenna Avery's article. I recently watched the movie Contact with my 5-year-old son. The next day, I was over the moon with delight at the myriad of questions he asked me. Why didn't we see the aliens? Are they coming back? Is there going to be another movie where we get to see them? Why didn't anyone believe her except the people outside the big room? I'm sure when he's older, he'll have even more questions about it. Like, is that what it could really be like to make first contact? Is it possible that other races are capable of such travel? Carl Sagan wrote the book Contact in an attempt to answer such questions. And in doing so, to my mind, provoked even more questions in asking of them. And isn't that a beautiful thing? 2, sci-fi allows us to ask hard questions about gender and racial equality and how we treat each other. Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, said, for me, science fiction is a way of thinking, a way of logic that bypasses a lot of nonsense. It allows people to look directly at important subjects. The beauty of sci-fi is that it allows us to stand outside the experience of our own culture and look back to face otherwise emotionally charged and complex questions in a more neutral manner. When we can be separate enough by looking at how we might fictionally treat an alien race, for instance, we see things with new eyes. District 9 is a powerful example of not only what might happen if an alien race arrived that was in need of help, another what if, but also if our own bad treatments of other people we don't understand or relate to, just as we've done countless times in our own history. District 9 itself is a chilling examination of apartheid and oppression in South Africa. Similarly, there are countless Star Trek episodes that ask moral questions, including issues of equality, sexism, and racism. The original Star Trek was groundbreaking in terms of women and people of non-white ethnicities playing valuable roles. It had a life-changing impact for me to see that as a young girl. And while we can reasonably discuss the many flaws of Star Trek then and now, in this regard. And this is funny. This was written in 2013. I think we can agree that it has done much to change the landscape of expectations about gendered and racial roles. Number 3, sci-fi looks ahead to the future and asks, is this where we want to end up? So many dystopian visions are put forth in science fiction. And why? Because sci-fi writers are futurists. We look ahead to see where we're going if we continue along our current trajectory. And let's face it, it ain't pretty, folks. Sometimes I think sci-fi writers are our best hope for waking people up to the travesties we're wrecking on our own planet. Or it's wreaking, I guess. The Day After Tomorrow, anyone? Along these lines, there's a terrific book called The Wind-Up Girl. By the way, I love The Wind-Up Girl by Paolo, and I can't pronounce his name, Bacigalupi, that looks at the possible future of agriculture disaster, the end of the oil age, bioengineered viruses, and posits major social struggles over seed banks and energy resources. I Am Legend looks at a future where an attempt to save humankind from cancer results in its downfall. As Isaac Asimov, iRobot or Nightfall said, individual science fiction stories may seem as trivial as ever to the blinder critics and philosophers of today, but the core of science fiction, its essence, has become crucial to our salvation if we are to be saved at all. 4, sci-fi is a powerful place to dream up and imagine new technology. Don't you want a handheld communicator? Back in the days of the early Star Trek, flip phones were like a dream come true when they came onto the market. Handheld computers and tricorders, I think of them whenever I hold my iPad in my hands. Self-propelled cars won't be too far off. Google already has the prototype. So many technologies have been devised on the pages and screens of sci-fi, inspiring scientists and inventors to make it so. I've always been fond of Arthur C. Clarke's third law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I love the idea that the things we think are so preposterous now may well be possible in the not too distant future simply because we've dreamed of it. So keep dreaming. And remember the wisdom of Ray Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451, who said, science fiction is the most important literature in the history of the world because it's the history of ideas, the history of our civilization birthing itself. Science fiction is central to everything we've done, and people who make fun of science fiction writers don't know what they're talking about. I really like that. And I've been thinking about it. You know, I read today about insect die-offs, like 25% of the insect population, up to 40% of the insect population on our planet is dying off. And this article also dealt with what should we do about insects? And it said, you know, let your grass grow, let flowers like dandelions or weeds like dandelions grow like wildflowers because they help bees, they help other insects. One of the scariest books I've ever read, and I was tweeting about this a couple days ago, was Charles Pellegrino's book, Dust. I think I might have talked about it yesterday, which is about what would happen if all the insects die off on this planet. And it ain't pretty. And I would suggest anybody read that book. But I dearly love science fiction. I've loved it my whole life. And you know, I don't think that Star Wars is science fiction. Star Wars is fantasy with wrapped in the cloak of science fiction, even though it's really not, because Star Wars isn't really about, well, as Brian Aldiss said, it's not about the search for a definition of man and his status in the universe, which will stand in our advanced but confused state of knowledge. It really isn't about that. It's much more fantasy oriented. It's not pondering the larger questions of life. Sure, you could say, well, maybe delving into the Force does. Sort of, I guess. But it's really not concerning itself with questions that we face every day about the ethics of our technology, whether it's biotechnology, whether it's genetic technology. I guess that's biotechnology too. But Star Wars is not concerned with anything like that. So I've never considered Star Wars. It's funny. That's why when people compare and contrast Star Trek and Star Wars, I always sort of, I wonder about that. I love Star Wars. I've loved it since it came out, but I don't think of it in the same terms as Star Trek, like at all. Because Star Wars is clearly a fantasy. It has much more in common with the samurai movie, for instance, than it does with an episode of Star Trek. just because they take place in space. People conflate the two, and I think it's sort of interesting. I mean, spaceships. It's very funny. You can make a comedy film, you can make a drama, you can make a legal thriller. They all have cars in them. People go to and fro with cars, but one doesn't necessarily mean that it's a different genre of film. Just like Star Wars and Star Trek both have spaceships in them, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're both science fiction stories. A lot of people think, well, if it's got a spaceship, it has to be science fiction. And I don't know. That's why I always gravitate toward Brian Aldiss's definition that science fiction is examining man's place in the universe and our confused state of knowledge about what's up. And I've always liked that for that reason. I always think it's important. And my favorite kinds of science fiction, that's why I read a lot of science fiction, because I don't think a lot of what passes for cinematic science fiction is really science fiction. Most of it's action adventure or fantasy, again, wrapped in a cloak of what people would call science fiction. But it's interesting. The other night, I was just scanning through Netflix, and of course, Forbidden Planet popped up. I love Forbidden Planet. Clicked on it, just started watching it as I do. And it's very interesting. To me, Forbidden Planet has one of the great, unseen, but one of the great science fiction alien races of all time, the Krell. And unfortunately, we don't meet the Krell until after they're gone, but we do see remnants of their amazing technology and what did them in. If you've never seen Forbidden Planet before, and if you haven't, shame on you. How come you haven't seen Forbidden Planet? It's on Netflix. It's in widescreen. It was one of the first movies like that to use an electronic score. It's beautifully made. I do love it. It's very interesting. There's a little throwback to the relationship that Alta has with a few of the men in the movie. Is, as I think for many viewers, especially female ones, might be a little cringe today, but definitely worth checking out. It's a loose adaptation of Shakespeare's play The Tempest. And what happens with the Krell basically is they create this giant machine that is able to manifest what's inside their minds, basically their subconscious, the id, but they were unprepared for what was going to be the result of that. Truly, what Ian Malcolm said, you were so preoccupied with the fact that you didn't ask yourselves whether you should. And that had catastrophic results for the Krell, and it also had catastrophic results for the crew of the Bellerophon, the spaceship. But if you haven't seen Forbidden Planet, it came out in 1956, and I think that you all should check it out because it definitely, for me, is in the top 10 of all the great science fiction movies ever made. So you should see that. But anyway, that was just something that was on my mind today. Just thinking about that. You know what else is on my mind? A letter. And who sent a letter? And it's been so long since I've heard from her. Vesna Lukic. Lukic? Is it Lukic? It's Lukic or Lukic. I think it's Lukic, right? Isn't it, Vesna? I just like saying Vesna. I think Vesna's like the coolest name ever. But this comes from Vesna. Hello, Robert and everybody else. It's been a long time since I wrote you a letter, but I just let other people write something clever. Hearing all those serious thoughts got me to write some serious thoughts too. Now, this new upcoming Star Wars movie got me thinking about The Last Jedi. Yes, I know I'm late and that everybody else has already analyzed it bit by bit, frame by frame, but I wanted to talk about a specific scene that really bothered me. And no, it's not the Canto Bite scene. As a matter of fact, I've quite enjoyed that because it was filmed in Dubrovnik, a city in Croatia, waving to Joseph, which was part of Yugoslavia, so I could recognize many things. And by that, I don't mean those horse-like creatures. We don't have them here yet, but the streets and the coast. The scene I have in mind is that with Finn and Rose near the end. Now, I won't go so far as to wonder how the hell could she fall for a guy at first sight the moment after she lost her sister. I couldn't do that. But hey, he is handsome and cute, and at that moment, very naked. So she obviously saw something that she liked. Oh, Vesna. I can understand that. I can also understand why she crushed into him. I'm all for attacking guys, especially if they're confused. So waiting won't do any good. and a girl has to do what a girl has to do, even if you have to kill your man just to prevent him from committing the suicide before you've even had a chance to have a first kiss, just because he wanted to play a hero. The only thing I didn't like is the scene after that. No, let me rephrase that. I hated the stupid line when she said, "That's how we're going to win. Not fighting for what we hate, but saving what we love." I still have a gastro reaction just thinking about that. What she should say at that moment is, "You stupid jerk. You want to die a virgin? Oh, no, not that easy. First, you do me, and then you may go out in a blaze of glory." That's how I would write that scene. I don't know if that would fix it, but it would certainly be a totally different movie. Many regards to you and all in the singularity. May the force and something else, no, not that, joy, Robert, joy, be with you. Vesna. Well, Vesna, I have to say your letter cracked me up. I think, look, anybody who's a fan of Star Wars or science fiction, we all need more sex in our lives. I really do think that's true. We also need to own passports. But I agree with you. I've never liked this idea that we can't go out. We're not going to win by fighting not fighting what we hate, but saving what we love. Like I agree with that. But I think people are far more motivated once you're a guy and you've been with a woman and it's good. We've all had the best sex in our lives. We know what that is. What you want to do is you want to have it again. You want to get back to whoever you just left, and you want to get busy again. You don't want to die. One and done. No. You need to have it again. That's why I think that one of the greatest things that we could do for anybody who chooses to wage jihad through suicide bombing is to get them laid, because then they'll want to get laid again. Maybe they'll think twice about blowing themselves up. No, I kid. But Vesna, I did appreciate your letter. You really cracked me up. So thank you for that, you saucy minx. Anyway, Matouine is here. Here's a little calamari flan to put toward a certain cute plush Star Wars toy if it's ever made. Congrats to your Seahawks on their recent victory. I have spoken. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. That was a hell of a game, man. And the Seahawks stuck it out. That was a long set, over 70-minute game. It was back and forth. What a nail biter that game was. I mean, it was probably the best suspense of any entertainment property this year. What a game. Mark C says, I dig your Rachel t-shirt. People like this shirt. I like this shirt too. It was one of those things that popped up on Facebook. I'm like, click, I gotta have that. I ordered this cool Black Phillip shirt too, but it hasn't come yet. I don't know why. Maybe they just took my money and ran. But this shirt, I ordered this shirt. I don't even know who made it. It popped up online, but they got it to me in mere days. Love this shirt, but thank you for that, Mark C. Blade Runner and Gattaca are probably my favorite pure science fiction films. I think both Gattaca and Blade Runner are two of the great science fiction films. I mean, they both deal, again, with real issues. How are we going to deal with these things? Like, I think we are currently ill prepared to deal with the moral and ethical questions genetic tampering will bring us. What happens when people are perfect, when everybody's a designer person? By the way, I don't necessarily shy away from that. From a technological perspective, if I could be monkeyed a bit with when I was in the womb, so to speak, and they were able to pull out, I have 20/30 vision in one eye. If I could, going along the lines with Vesna, if I could be packing a little more firepower, if you know what I'm saying, that would be nice too. I would like to be, but that's why I became a cunning linguist. But I think that's one of the things that would be, is genetic engineering, is genetic tampering, is it a bad thing? Ultimately, if we can make people healthier, last longer, is that such a bad thing? If you're parents and you want to be able to design your perfect kid, is that a bad thing? Or should we just allow natural selection to soldier on? I don't know. I mean, technology is always tended to make our lives better. Look at the last 100 years. Life expectancy has gone up almost 30 years across the board. So if you could genetically engineer more perfect people, wouldn't you? Shouldn't you? I don't know. These are questions that I don't think our society is prepared to answer. But Gattaca is a great movie that looks into those very questions. Another great movie, like you said, like Mark said, was Blade Runner. I mean, I love Blade Runner because ultimately the central conceit is that is why would you create artificial human beings, or are they artificial simply because they were manufactured? And once those beings they have a soul, whatever the spark is that gives us consciousness, that lets them feel, that lets them have emotions, is it ethical to only let them live 4 years? I don't know. Along the same lines, one of my favorite science fiction movies of the last 10 years that has gone criminally underviewed in my mind, maybe it's a little more than 10 years now, but is Never Let Me Go, based on the novel. I love Never Let Me Go. If you haven't seen it, I won't ruin it here. And when you first put it in, Never Let Me Go is a movie I tell people that if you've never heard of it, don't even read what it's about. Just listen to Robster here. Let me, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the master of fun and wonder, the existential Mr. Rogers, let my voice guide you to see the movie Never Let Me Go, directed by Mark Romanek, and with an incredible music score by Rachel Portman. Don't read anything about it. Just watch it. Just watch it and bring some tissues with you. But it's an incredible film dealing with the same thing. Another great science fiction movie dealing with ethical, moral, medical questions. Sidhu Screening Room is here, looking to get a 4K TV. This BF, ideally with Dolby Vision. Recommendations on something that won't break the bank. Can't wait to watch Blade Runner 2049 on the bad boy. Well, look, I'm a snob when it comes to TVs, and I would go OLED, not QLED, not LCD, OLED. If you're getting a new TV, and I'd get the biggest OLED you can, but it's expensive. Now, currently, LG is the only company in the world that actually makes OLED screens. They make the screens for other TV manufacturers. But I would go 4K OLED with Dolby Vision if you can. Unfortunately, the TVs that I want, because I want to replace mine. I mean, I want to get like an 88-inch OLED, a Panasonic, but they don't even sell them in this country, and they're like 12 grand. But OLED would be the way to go. So Sidhu, hit me back. Luke Beckett says, how could George Lucas have made something as great as Star Wars and then do Howard the Duck? Well, remember Willard Hayuk and Gloria Katz. Is it Hayuk? They were a husband and wife team. They were the ones that made it. So, but I agree. George Lucas produced it. It's funny. I look at Howard the Duck, and Howard the Duck, to me, first of all, if you haven't read Steve Gerber's comics, they're very satiric. It's a very different feel, very different kind of story than what the final movie turned out to be. The tagline for the comic was "Trapped in a World He Never Made." There's a lot of political satire there, and I think the real problem with Howard the Duck is it doesn't work in live action the way it was presented. Clearly a man in this suit. The duck is it wouldn't work. I think you could do it now. And Howard the Duck would be CG, but even the story, it shows a complete sort of misunderstanding. It was taking material that was actually very adult oriented and tried to turn it into a kids movie, and I thought that was very, very wrong-headed. And indeed, I think that one of the great tragedies of George Lucas's later filmography is he really does believe that he's making Star Wars for kids, but unfortunately, the first Star Wars is certainly not a kids movie. Not a kids movie by any stretch of the imagination. And it's a movie for everybody, but it's a movie that doesn't pander to children. And if you look at Star Wars and then you move forward to 1999 and watch The Phantom Menace, that is a movie that is totally manufactured, created for kids. And it doesn't work because I really don't know what happened with children's entertainment I don't. From the time I was a kid, it seems like children's entertainment. When I was a kid, even when they would do family-friendly material, look, Disney Plus has made me look back, just cursory glance, looking back at things like that I liked as a kid. Apple Dumpling Gang, the Herbie the Love Bug movies, Treasure of Matacumbe, Candle Shoe. Now, these were the live action films of the 70s that Disney was making. And while, yes, they were very kid friendly, they weren't pandering. There were still adult characters in these movies. I mean, the Herbie the Love Bug movies, I delighted in those when I was a kid, but there weren't child protagonists. I mean, you're looking at Dean Jones, and there were adults. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is a very sophisticated film that Walt Disney was making for, I mean, he died in 1966, but whether it was in Search of the Castaways, or whether it was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, or any of the movies that they were, the live action films, Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins is very kid friendly, but for the most part, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which was made for kids too, was made for everybody, is a very sophisticated movie. And I think this idea that we had to make entertainment that only kids could watch, kids want to watch stories about characters that they aspire to do, or they might be sometime in the future. They're not, when I was a kid, I watched entertainment with kids in it, but it was never something. The reason I love Star Wars is because the characters in it, I wanted to grow up and be them. I don't think I would have dug Star Wars if my first Star Wars experience was about a 9 or 10-year-old kid that was the main protagonist. I wouldn't have gone for that. But I think that Luke, to answer your question, I think that George Lucas sort of forgot that, or maybe he never knew that in the first place. And I think that's why Star Wars as a franchise, that is the beginnings, the origins of why it's always been sort of at war with itself. Certainly beginning with Return of the Jedi on. Willow Yang says, I really enjoyed the documentary series Unnatural Selection. We had a great discussion about it at work. Yeah, it was a great documentary series, and I highly recommend everybody watch Unnatural Selection. For those of you who don't know, it's a Netflix documentary, and it deals with armchair genetic engineers. And sometimes people who aren't. And it's really, really interesting. I'm glad you liked it, because I knew you would, Willow. I knew you would. It's a really interesting documentary. Talk about a series that, again, brings up ethical questions, ethical quandaries, all of those things. Unnatural Selection is definitely one of them. Stubble McShave says, speaking of science fiction, I'm enjoying Hyperion. I'm in the middle of fall of Hyperion, although I do have some criticism. So far, it's 4 out of 5 for me. Hey, why wouldn't you? I don't think it's necessarily perfect. I mean, it's been a while since I read the Hyperion Cantos, but Hyperion, Fall of Hyperion remain. I always think of it as one book, even though it's split into two, but it was written as one. It's some of my favorite science fiction, modern science fiction. I mean, I say modern, it's 30 years old now, almost 30 years old. Great books. The Richard is back. Hello, the Richard. How are you? Sex and sci-fi classic Barbarella, says the Richard. Yes, and you know what? When people talk about comic book adaptations, they forget Barbarella, the Dino De Laurentiis 1-2 punch of Barbarella and Diabolic, or Danger Diabolic as we know it, both from European comic books. Yes, I like Barbarella. Remember, Barbarella has a plot point about the orgasmatron. That's right, a machine that generates orgasms, which, I'm sure Vesta could tell you a lot about those things, but I don't happen to own one. But I did like that. And of course, Duran Duran the band took their name from Miles O'Shea. Miles O'Shea's character, Dr. Duran in Barbarella. I really like Barbarella. I think Barbarella is fun. Barbarella. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, I dig it. I got to stop singing on the show. Rick Berg is here. He just sent in a super chat. Thank you, Rick. I appreciate it. The Richard says, I love to stumble upon lesser-known Philip K. Dick-inspired films. Imposter is one. I believe Screamers is one. is, Screamers with Peter Weller. Screamers is one. What are some others? What are some other Philip K. Dick? I don't know. I mean, other than, let's say, there's Blade Runner and Total Recall, but everyone knows those. I just don't know off the top of my head. I have to think about it. Is the Adjustment Bureau? Was the Adjustment Bureau a Philip K. Dick book? I'm not sure. I don't remember. But yeah, I mean, anytime you deal with reality and what is real and what isn't real, always a good thing. Mark C is here. Mark C says OLED is based on organic tech and degrades faster than QLED, which is synthetic. I like a bright picture. I find OLED loses some details in the shadow in favor of super deep blacks. I disagree with that, man. It depends how you adjust your set. I will take OLED over QLED. I don't know how long it lasts. I mean, I've been a plasma TV fan, and every plasma TV that I've ever owned, they're like, well, this would fade over time. It never does. Of course, I always replace them. But this plasma TV that I have, my Panasonic 65-inch, was the last 65-inch set that Panasonic made. I think 2013. And it looks as great as the day when I first got it, but I do want to upgrade. I just like how OLED works, but that I don't. To be honest, I don't know if it does degrade faster than QLED. I have to look into that. And I think OLED, you can get the picture. It's all about, look, a TV is all about the adjustments you make to it. You really have to if you just turn on your TV and put up with factory settings, don't. I mean, I bought a calibration disc for DVD, then I bought one for Blu-ray, and all the TVs that I've had, I always use a calibration disc and get it to look exactly the way I want it. That's why I always scream at anybody if they touch my TV settings, because if they do, they'll have to answer to me. Alexander Wilson is here. Alexander Wilson says, Mark Cuban said 5G in the next 3 years will change and create the next evolution of streaming. What are your thoughts? Well, yeah, of course. I mean, our technology can be better, but there's serious questions about 5G in terms of its environmental impact, its impact on us. But yes, it can. We're always marching forward. But again, when it comes to technology, I think we have to really start doing more due diligence in terms of the research on what these things are really doing to the environment. And we're so quick to move forward. It's like, but isn't it great? Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. I honestly, though, don't know enough about 5G technology to comment on it. But look, it's going to come down the pike, whether we're going to do it or not. But it will. I mean, the faster we have, first of all, it's amazing that we can stream video the way we can stream it now. I've told the story. When I was working on Arcade with Peter Billingsley, we were doing a lot of short films and things, and we worked for the Department of Transportation in California, and we made these videos of traffic because they were going to put cameras by on-ramps and things to monitor traffic, but they needed a video that they could practice, or they could actually test streaming over the telephone lines. And this was amazing. This was like 1994, and we made a really cool video. We just drove around and shot traffic in LA, which wasn't very hard, but it was still the way we cut it together. And we used Foghat's song Slow Ride. They thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. And then they let us go up in a plane. And what happened was, when we made the video, they showed us how they streamed video 15 frames a second over the phone lines. I mean, now it was like working with, as Spock said, stone knives and bear skins. But we did, and then they actually sent us up in a plane. They took us up in the Cessna, and Peter and I were shooting out each side of the plane, and they wanted to see how surveillance would work from the air, and could they transmit this data. So we basically would fly over houses with cars with license plates, and could people see them from far? Could they shoot them close enough from the sky that you could transmit that data like the FBI? And it was crazy back in, I think how far we've come. And God, that was 25 years ago. But hey, we still did it. And it was a lot of fun. The Richard says, my little brother Brian wants to say hi and ask if you like Mark Summers, Double Dare, or Nick. Mark's B-Day was this week. Brian is his biggest fan. You know, I'm not up on Mark Summers. I'm sorry to say. But if your brother likes him, I'm sure he's an okay guy. But I don't know. So I apologize for that. But tell your brother hi. Tell Brian hello. But I didn't know it was Mark Summers' birthday. But if you're his biggest fan, did you send him a card? Not that you have to, but you could, or even tweet or find him on social media. It's always something nice to have when somebody sends you something like that. Let's see. Now that I've read Vesna's letter, I think I hope I did a good job for that. Well, speaking of Mark C, who's just telling me about OLED, he sent in a letter too. This is from Mark Chure. Dear Rob, I'm writing to you, and hopefully the facts can explain why Dave Filoni should have been head of creative for all things Star Wars. And despite John Campia's valid point, his perspective still holds no water. First, what is at the heart of the problem with Star Wars? Do they contain aspects of a woke agenda? I believe they do. Others do not. Was not getting the cast back together a mistake? Was the character of Luke mishandled? Again, I believe so. Others do not. At the end of the day, what I believe we have is J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson movies with Star Wars subject matter instead of Star Wars movies by J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson. The difference being we got the author's voice and the thoughts, not the characters. It seems that the Star Wars story group's job was simply to make sure everything lined up with past continuity and none of the current creators step on each other's toes. It has been suggested by me and others that Dave Filoni would have been better served as the head of this committee and added to the group's requirements, making sure Star Wars and its characters stay on model and follow the universe's own verisimilitude. At no point would this conflict with the nuts and bolts of producing a film. Basically taking Kevin Feige's job and splitting up creative from the production. John Campia suggests that Filoni in charge of creative is a stupid idea due to his lack of experience in live-action film. This may be a valid point, but how does Filoni's credentials stack up against the original 7 members of the story group that were chosen? Just for kicks, I will add their social stereotype identities to make a later point. All facts were taken from IMDb. While I know the site doesn't list everything, I think it covers the jobs that could lead to being responsible for the direction of the largest film franchise in cinema until the MCU. All credits are prior to 2013 when the group was formed. First, there is head of story group Curie Hart, a woman of color. She was a writer on 1 episode of Crossing Jordan and 1 episode of 1-800-MISSING, where she was a story editor of 7 other episodes. Next is Carrie Beck, a white female. She has an executive producer credit on 2010's TV movie Ghosts Aliens. Next, we have Diana Williams, woman of color. Prior to 2013 in Lucasfilm, she has no other credits listed. Next is Leland Shee, male, Asian. Leland was a holdover from LucasArts, where he was a video game tester. Then there's Pablo Hidalgo, Latino, male. Pablo worked for Lucasfilm in publishing as an author of various nonfiction Star Wars books. Next, we have Matt Martin, white male. Prior to Lucasfilm 2013, Matt has no credits listed. Last but not least, we have Rain Roberts, woman of color. Rain was an assistant to a producer, Brad Kessel, on A Haunting in Connecticut 2, Ghosts in Georgia, and Life as We Know It. She was also an associate producer on the 2008 documentary, The Fair Trade. That is a complete rundown of the 7 original members of the Star Wars story group. So, does Dave Filoni stack up against the original 7? From 1997 to 99, he worked as a character layout artist on King of the Hill. In 2001, he worked on 5 episodes of The Oblongs doing retakes. In 2005, he was an animation director for the Win Awards. He worked as a character designer on 2 episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender and directed 9 episodes. From 2007 to 2015, he showran Star Wars: The Clone Wars, producing over 62 hours of Star Wars content and worked 5 days a week for 6 years alongside Star Wars creators as Lucas's only known protege of all things Star Wars. If facts are correct, Filoni had booked more hours of entertainment than the entire story group combined. However, combined, the original 7 have one thing that Filoni will never be able to do: and it makes for a good statistic along the Bechdel test. To this, I'd love to hear John Campia's reply. Thanks, Mark Jure. Well, look, it's a very good point you're making. And one of the problems, I think, in like all the way back when I worked at Warner Brothers. I mean, I worked at Warner Brothers starting in September of 1989. 1989. And I've told the story before, I worked for the senior vice president of physical production at Warner Brothers. The extent of my experience in the film business was I had worked as an art department assistant on one movie, which was Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. My second job was working for the senior vice president of production at Warner Brothers in feature production. And our department oversaw the physical production of every movie that Warner Brothers was making. Now, a lot of those movies were made off the lot, like Bonfire of the Vanities was being shot in and around New York City. Other movies, such as Defending Your Life, Joe versus the Volcano, one of the movies that I work on that was on Gremlins 2. Those were movies that were actually shot on the back lot at Warner Brothers. So I was on those sets every day, basically pushing papers. Now, I didn't know fuck all about production from a studio standpoint, but I learned it. I learned it on the job. Now, the funny thing now that has changed from 30 years ago is this idea, like if I were to come out and say, working at Warner Brothers at the executive level was interesting because I was one of the only people, and so was John Labib, who I work with. John Labib and I were in the executive branch, but we were not Ivy League educated people. And neither was Jamie Johnson, who was my other management trainee. There's three of us because in our department, we had three executive production managers. So there's Bill Young, there was three executive production managers, and they had like 5 movies apiece. And then we worked for each one of them. And I worked for Kurt Newman, whose dad directed the original The Fly and Rocket Ship XM. So I was learning on the job, and it was an incredible experience. Now, for me, I had already known a great deal about movies. Not only did I go to film school, but I grew up living and breathing cinema. But, I don't necessarily think that I should have been picked as a management trainee for physical production, although it was my knowledge and enthusiasm that got me in that door through happenstance. So I was lucky to be there. And the other two guys I work with, they were lucky to be there too. Now, they got in, I'd have to say, it was really through nepotism, people who you knew. But once you're in there, you're in there. But the problem now is that in Hollywood, everyone says it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, it's kind of both. What you know will get you people that you need to know. But a lot of the time, people get hired because they're easy to work with. If you get along with somebody in Hollywood and they're competent at what they do, you'll hire them because you spend a lot more time. It's not like a job where you go to work 8 hours, you punch in and out and leave. It is a very social business. It is what you're doing the whole time is you're basically talking to people, you're hanging out, you work in a story group. If you're sitting around and talking about stories all day long, it's a very social environment, very social atmosphere. So it's different. What I'm trying to say is being a fan, if you're a huge fan of something, you're not always the best person to work on that particular thing because you might be a great fan of whatever material you want to work on, but your people skills are lacking and you certainly don't know how to play politics at the studio level. It's a combination of those things. And it's only been fairly recently that people that were diehard fans of something have been put in charge of those things or other things like those. Both Kevin Feige and Jeff Johns were working for Richard Donner, who made Superman the movie back, I think definitely after I was at Warner Brothers, but I was in Richard Donner's and Joel Silver's offices every day as well because I had to deliver paperwork where I had to pick up paperwork that had to be distributed throughout the executive building at Warner Brothers, and that was part of my job. But not everybody, you'd think that it's funny because you would think that the studios would pay more attention to those things, but they just don't. What comes in a lot of the time, especially if you're working as an executive or something, what are your credentials? Now, I'll tell you something else. There are also people that, because they know somebody, they'll start their entry-level position is to read screenplays. Now, in my case, one of the things that I was not always the best at reading screenplays, because I would really want to read the whole thing. If I started reading a script, I'm like, I would spend a long time reading it to figure out how did it end. And I'm a fast reader. And when I would have to then write coverage, where you have to write a synopsis and then you have to write notes, some people could just toss that off the top of their head. I really slaved over that and tried to figure out what are my thoughts, because I wanted to give the writer the time of day. What I didn't realize at the time is that 99% of all the screenplays that I was reading in my job were bad. So, and I came to recognize that after a long period of time. I'm like, well, wait a minute. I can recognize if a screenplay, you can honestly recognize if a screenplay is bad in the first 5 pages, usually the first page, but within 5 pages, you know, it's self-evident. But when it comes to the story group, I understand. I mean, you'd think, because we're all fans of these things, that there would be people that really understood and knew and loved and breathed Star Wars. I just don't know if doing that is necessarily the most effective thing when it comes to, you really have to understand. Again, this is why Kevin Feige is the way he is. He came up as a PA. He saw how movies are made. He worked for a director, but he also then worked as a producer, or producing in some capacity, 13 Marvel movies before he even started with the MCU. And he was already a fan, but then he cut his teeth on 13 movies before the MCU. So he was able to see what he needed to do, how he needed to do it, what mistakes had been made previously, and how do we not make those mistakes again. And the real problem with Star Wars is that it did not. Kathleen Kennedy is a great producer. She is a great facilitator, but she's not the kind of story visionary that should be put in charge. And I'm not saying she shouldn't be put in charge of Star Wars, but in terms of the stories, like we have this story group, the story group can't do anything. And the story group, yeah, maybe these will be good, maybe they won't. If you don't have a working understanding of both Star Wars and movie making, it's not ideal. You have to know both of these things. It's already hard enough to make a great movie if you're an experienced producer, but to have people that don't quite understand, and especially when you have corporate mandates. The problem with Star Wars is not the story group. The problem with Star Wars is not Kathleen Kennedy, who, by the way, navigating what she's had to navigate and having the kind of pressure put on her, she's actually acquitted herself quite well. What people forget is we might not like the content, or it's not canonical, or this, that, and the other thing. At the studio level, they don't care. They want to know, did this movie make money? This Force Awakens, total anomaly. Last Jedi made money, made over $1 billion. Rogue One, over $1 billion. Solo did not. But, having a 75% track record is not so bad in Hollywood. And having 3 movies, let's take Solo out of the equation. 3 movies that made over $4 billion is a monstrously huge win, despite how it might have been tough to make those movies, and had they not had to replace personnel or do different things, how would you have anticipated that? How would you have anticipated that? It's easy to Monday morning quarterback, but for whatever reason, 3 of those movies, Solo turned out to be not the case, but 3 of those movies made over $1 billion. That is a huge epic win for any studio executive, certainly Kathleen Kennedy. And the funny thing is, a lot of online punditry never take into consideration the business aspects of how Hollywood works. They're only thinking about it from the fan perspective and making something that we all love as fans, the stories that we like. Look, I'll flat out say The Mandalorian I thought was fine, but you know what The Mandalorian felt like to me, since you're talking about Dave Filoni? Dave Filoni had never directed live action. The Mandalorian, the episode that we saw, I liked it, but it really felt like a proof of concept that Disney allowed it to get made with Filoni and Favreau using this new technology to see how it would work. If it didn't work, they wouldn't have moved forward, but they proved it's a proof of concept. and it's not the greatest thing in the world. I thought Filoni's direction, it really smacked of a first-time director. Not that it was bad. It's just a first-time director figuring out where does a camera go. And he was somebody that oversaw animation, and it felt to me, the scenes felt to me, it all felt to me like an episode of animation. The whole thing. It was still cool. It was still good. The proof for me in The Mandalorian is going to be in this next episode, and I don't know who directed it, but it's going to be really interesting to see, using this technology and having really interesting directors making the shows, how is it all going to work out? But the problem, I think, Mark, that when you go in and you look at these people in the story group, are they Star Wars fans? We're trying to judge them. There's probably other qualities that help them get those jobs that we're unaware of. Now, I've worked a lot of jobs that are not on my IMDb. My script reader jobs are not on my IMDb. I did that for years. So even though you just look at the IMDb, remember, people have had a lot of experience. There's a lot of experience in Hollywood that you don't get credit for, especially if you're working at the studio level. It always cracks me up when I have friends that were studio execs that'll constantly go on about how I worked on this movie or how I worked on that movie. And I'm always like rolling my eyes going, it's one thing to be an executive for a company that made a movie. But if you didn't directly work on the film and you're just an executive at this company that arranged for financing, I have a lot of friends like that that'll put uncredited, executive at whatever production company on the IMDb. And I'm like, well, that's hilarious, but whatever. But there's just a lot of experience people have that my IMDb page does not reflect a lot of the first 10 years of my experience in Hollywood, whether it's music videos, whether it was short films, all kinds of things that I did. I worked in casting for Free Willy when we were looking for the kid to play the lead. And that doesn't, it's hard to tell. But yes, from a fan perspective, it seems absurd that on these big franchises, you don't have a think tank. You don't have sort of the guardians of Oa or the watchers like Watu who can tell you something about everything. It seems strange to me that there isn't that kind of a consulting group working on this that really knows this material backwards and forwards, that's read all of the books, that's read all of the comics, that have an encyclopedic knowledge of Star Wars, that you can't go in there and consult those people. Because you should be able to. At least that's the way I would do it. It's kind of a long-winded answer. But your point is well taken. Muad'Dib, I love that. Finally saw Dr. Sleep. Cool Easter egg when a character said, Ka is a wheel. Thoughts on Ka? Ka is a wheel. Thoughts on Ka? You know what? What does that mean? I know that there's tattoos of that. Let me just look this up. I know it's a Dark Tower thing, but hang on. Ka is a wheel. Its one purpose is to turn. The spin of Ka always brings us back to the same place. All right, of course. Yes, okay. Ka is a wheel. Yes, I mean that obviously makes a lot of sense if you think about Dr. Sleep bringing us all the way back around to the Overlook Hotel. Or you could even say that in terms of the fact that Flanagan decided to make a sequel to Kubrick's The Shining, as opposed to adapting. Here, it's very interesting. There's a lot going on that I've been pondering about various sequels to things, and Dr. Sleep. There's two things that I keep thinking about. One is Dr. Sleep and how it's been. I've said this on the show for a while, a couple times maybe. How Dr. Sleep is both a sequel to Stephen King's novel and also a sequel to Kubrick's film. And I think part of that is problematic from a certain standpoint. Now, I think that obviously Stephen King famously doesn't like Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining, and it's a very different movie than this. I mean, even people that read The Shining, the topiary animals and things like that, those aren't even in the movie at all. And I understand why Kubrick dispensed with those things. But it's very, very interesting that we have this, because then I wonder, I think the movie didn't click. They're asking, why didn't it click with audiences? Because The Shining's old. I think a lot of the movie-going audience, I mean, even if you're 40 years old, that's no guarantee the Shining came out when you were 1. And, as you get older, movies, 5 years old, 10 years, let's say your first 10 years of your life, why would you be even watching The Shining? So that's a decade old. And then you're concentrating on what's more in front of you. But I think that, the idea caused the wheel. It's good. So the Dr. Sleep is a primary example of that, coming around 2 different ways. And the other thing I keep thinking about in terms of that, since you brought this see, now I'm going to be stuck on this all day, is the Watchmen TV show. I don't understand. If you've never seen Watchmen, I don't know how any of the TV show would make sense. I mean, the newer stuff, that's the newer characters and all that, I get it. But the whole context of all of it, you have to have read the comic or know something about Watchmen, or it doesn't work. And I'm fascinated to see where it goes. Like, I haven't really talked to anybody that was unfamiliar with Watchmen that's watching the show. Campy said his wife was, but it's hard for me to believe that it would be as effective. But thoughts on Ka? I mean, and that whole idea of Ka is a dark tower. It is a dark tower. The Dark Tower, it all comes from the Dark Tower. But you know what? Stephen King weaves in his entire universe in and out of the Dark Tower books. There's so much, like, how Randolph Flagg figures in and all that. I like that. I guess you could say then the whole idea of the whole concept of Ka as a wheel is all about Stephen King's the Kingiverse. I guess I like that. Thanks for that. That's a good question. Evan Fitzberg says, hey, Rob, John says collectors would still buy physical media when available to stream. I bought Daredevil after viewing it on Netflix, so I agree. Love you, man. Well, look, I'm a lifelong collector. I've loved collecting things. I collect books. I collect physical media. I collect models. I collect toys. I still collect a lot of stuff. But here's my feeling about, and I've told people, how many times have I bought things? So Ted Van Dyne, who's a friend of mine on Twitter, got me the Black Hole from the Disney Movie Club. Now, this which I haven't opened is the redone version, because the first version that came out a couple months ago didn't have the overture on it. And on Disney Plus, you have the overture. Now, I've really been grappling with having just completed I've got my Marvel Cinematic Universe discs. I have them all in 4K. I have them all Blu-ray. And then a lot of them I have Blu-ray 3D versions. So I have got a huge collection. Well, when I was watching Endgame, I want to see the special features. There's all these special features that don't appear. We were talking about this on the John Campy show, that don't appear on the Blu-ray or the 4K disc that I purchased. So it's like, okay, well, and the movie's streaming in 4K or Dolby Atmos or whatever, you can get it in those terms. And while sure, streaming isn't as good, here's the question I have. As somebody who has thousands of movies on disc, I will tell you right away that most of the movies that I'm collecting, I would say that the majority of my collection has gone unwatched. Some discs I haven't watched since I first got them. I watched them one time, maybe 10 years ago. I mean, I've been buying Blu-rays since 2007. 12 years I've been buying Blu-rays. And my movie collection, while I love it, I'm constantly getting new things or classics. Local Hero came out. Criterion put out Local Hero. A 4K version of Suspiria is coming out. So I'll have to buy the 4K version of Suspiria. Will be the third time that I've purchased a great version of Suspiria for home video. The first time was Anchor Bay, the 3-disc set. Then I got Don May's version last year, or right at the end of the year before. And now I've ordered the 4K version of Suspiria. But when was I watched Suspiria twice when I got the Blu-ray. It's amazing, but it's not like I watch it every day. So the idea of collecting physical media, I am a collector, But I also understand that how often do you even enjoy your collection? I mean, now where I've got my home theater set up, it's in our room. So it's not like I can just go in and watch movies if Elizabeth's sleeping. My normal routine when I was a bachelor, when I wasn't not when I was married, but when I was married, I was with my ex-wife for 8 years. But the idea is that I would usually watch 2 movies a night when I was alone. If I wasn't doing anything, I would go home and I would usually watch a movie from 10 to 12 and 12 to 2, and I'd go to bed at 2. And during that time I'd drink some whiskey or some wine or whatever and watch 2 films. And these are films that I had seen over and over and over again. But nowadays, I tend to watch when you live with somebody that has seen movies or doesn't understand why you want to watch movies like Hunt for Red October over and over and over again. What's all that about? My collection sits there sort of dormant. And as much as I've been collecting, and I totally appreciate the collecting mentality when it comes to physical media, and there are movies that I don't think are going to necessarily wind up on streaming services, such as, well, I'll give you an example. The Swedish version of They Call Her One-Eye, which is where Daryl Hannah's character came from. She was inspired by this character in the Kill Bill movies. So They Call Her One-Eye, which its original title was Thriller, A Cruel Picture. This is a movie that I have the DVD of. I don't know if it's come out on Blu-ray. It's a DVD. It's a rape revenge picture, and the Swedish version has hardcore sex in it, X-rated sex. Now, I have this movie. When I bought it, it seemed like I had to own it because it's a very significant genre, film from the 70s. And it seemed like my collection, I needed to have certain things in my collection to stay legit. But I think I only watched that the first time I bought it because I had never seen the original X-rated version of it. I was like, wow, I didn't know that. And I've never watched it again. It's not like it's the kind of movie that you could put on. However, I have it, and I'm not going to part with it, and I'm not going to sell it. I'm not going to get rid of it because it'd be hard to get again. So I'm like, no, I'll hang on to it. And it's almost like I've had to hang on. There's a lot of movies that I've bought that I thought, okay, I need this movie, to keep my collection up. My collection wouldn't be respectable if I didn't have certain genre touchstones. And yet, do I watch them? I mean, as an old man with one foot in his grave, how long am I going to have left on this mortal coil before I shuffle off? Will I get through my collection again? And, it's funny to have, I was thinking, I've had Disney Plus for a day now. Well, yesterday, I guess 2 days. Yesterday, launched on Monday night. Since I've had Disney Plus, and you could say this about Netflix too, but I've flitted through the Apple Dumpling Gang. The Apple Dumpling Gang rides again, Tron Legacy, and Avengers Endgame, the Jeff Goldblum show. We watched Lady and the Tramp last night. I watched The Mandalorian. And just because of the functionality and zipping through, in one day I went through far more movies than I do with my own movie collection because I just don't do that as much as I used to. So how important is it? But I appreciate it, Evan. I'm talking to myself. I'm trying to figure it all out. Do I still order Blu-rays? Yes. I still order 4K discs? Yes. But I'm like, I look at my Marvel collection and I'm like, when am I ever going to watch these discs again? I mean, I guess if I ever got an 88-inch OLED TV, I'd go back and pull out all my 4K discs and watch them because, yes, I do understand that 4K discs on lossless audio is better than streaming. Streaming is still compressed and all that. I get it, but it's still, it's tough, man. It is tough. It's tough to swallow all of these things. I still love physical media. And by the way, you know what? Maybe this makes me some kind of a shameless materialist, but I love getting new Blu-rays and opening them up. Like if Arrow puts it out, you get that American Werewolf in London disc that has the booklets and the fold-out posters and the stuff. I love all that. I ordered from the UK. There's a company putting out. I love the original 1975 Norman Jewison version of Rollerball. They're putting out in an orange box, like the Houston team from the movie, like a 3-disc set that has a new documentary in it. I mean, I have to have that. I had to have that. I have to have that box. If nothing else, I need the box but I need to get that, even though I've got the American release that Twilight Time put out of Rollerball that I actually gave away. I gave to Ashley Miller, who co-wrote X-Men First Class and Thor, and Agent Cody Banks, who I've known for a long time. But I gave him my Twilight Time Rollerball because I have the Arrow version from the UK. And now this other version's coming out. And Elizabeth will go, why do you have 2 copies of Rollerball? I'm like, well, I had 3. But, I had to have that. I looked at it. I'm like, I have to have that box. It has to be in my collection. I have to be able to point to it and go. And people have to come over and go, ooh, where'd you get this Rollerball box? The 2 people that might do that before I die. But still, it was one of those things like, you have to have that. And it's crazy. Why? Why do I have to have that? Isn't the movie important? And I've had the movie, but I needed that cool box. I love the packaging because collectors like that stuff. And maybe it's irrational, but I want it. And I've owned Rollerball on VHS, on Laserdisc, on DVD, and I'm now going to own a 3rd copy on Blu-ray. Although I think the Rollerball that's coming out is in 4K. I think it might be. Crazy. Collectors are nuts. We're all crazy. Mark C says, I tweeted Harloff about my Schnepp drawing. That was a great drawing, by the way. Understandably, he hasn't answered some schmuck soliciting free art. Would you be interested in the piece? Yeah, I mean, you tweeted to me. I thought it was great. Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. The Richard says, it seems to be a legit possibility that Maul could have a kick-ass fight in the Obi-Wan series, but before a death shot, Obi-Wan uses the Force to erase his memory. Maul seems not to remember in the animated series. I've been reading that a lot. That could happen, I guess. I mean, who doesn't want to see Darth Maul fight Ben Kenobi? And by the way, as Star Trek fans who have to watch Star Trek Discovery know, maybe they can bend canon. I'm a canonista, but I'm not advocating they should, but maybe they could. Mike told me that I should mention that the Wheel of Time's writer's room have started writing the 2nd season. God love you, Stubble. God love you. You're the biggest Wheel of Time fan in the whole world, which is good. And I love that. I haven't read many letters today. I'm going to read more. I have more. I love this letter. Now I know I'm not currying favor, but our man, the Sheriff of Nottingham, Terry Flynn, has written in about something that I thought about for a long time. Dear Rob, just a quickie. Watch Vesna, cue Vesna and Willow laughing. Just a quickie, but on the issue that incensed me more than ever, the composer James Horner. I just rewatched Aliens. The moments of military approach and/or suspense are an out-and-out reuse of the themes from Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. For instance, the Reliant suddenly appearing in the Mutara Nebula. It's there as the alien appearing theme, not a variation. Note for bloody note. The British Broadcasting Corporation Radio 3, the classical music station, once did an infamous show. They played Horner themes alongside those of famous themes of famous composers. No comments were made due to fear of litigation, but the implication was obvious. At around the same time when Google started autocomplete on searches, it was hilarious that before Google realized it had to censor so-called inappropriate searches, the autocomplete for James Horner was plagiarism. Sorry, while Star Trek II is a good score, it is at best somewhat original. Everything after should be compared back to back with it. Perhaps then we can put Horner where he deserves to be, in the trash. Goldsmith and Williams did indeed use certain common themes, but never the identical music. Sorry, Star Trek II, though I love you, you have a big black mark against you. Oh, dude, I'll do you one better. Star Trek II is a ripoff of Horner's score for Humanoids from the Deep. Not only that, but for Battle Beyond the Stars, Horner ripped off Jerry Goldsmith's score from Star Trek the Motion Picture. And I totally agree with you. The aliens stuff is right out of Star Trek 2. It's right after. I'm with you. I mean, James Horner has done that a lot. Now, I do like some of his scores. I mean, I liked his score. I remember loving his score for 48 Hours. It had cool steel drums in it and things like that. And I've liked his scores in the past. I love his score for Brainstorm. Douglas Trumbull's movie Brainstorm. I really like that, and I have enjoyed his scores. But man, yes, he would probably tell you he was inspired by, but yes, it's very dangerously close to plagiarism. And I think you're right about that. And you go back and you listen to his scores, and everybody knows which score you can find that he ripped off. Now, yeah, I think that's problematic. I think it was, or we could just say he was very influenced. Very, very influenced. This is a good one. Here's a good letter. I like this letter a lot. This one comes from Darren McKinnon. Dear Mr. Burnett, first, I would like to thank you for your show. It's insightful, informative, and often gives you something to reflect upon. Movies, franchises, sci-fi, horror. I often find myself agreeing with your take on a lot of things. Not all, but a lot. One thing I seem to agree with you on all the time is your take on a franchise that is close to my heart and mind, as I know it is to yours. Star Trek. I remember in high school telling a friend of mine how Star Trek was no good. He asked me if I ever watched a full episode. I said no. I was basing my comment on nothing really, only other than a few glimpses of the TV shows, the original series and Next Generation, combined with my immature view of the world. He suggested that I sit through a few. So during a week off of school, I did just that. Since those 5 days in the early 90s, I have been a fan. Thank you, Vince. I've received a degree in biology, which allowed me to further develop the analytical part of my mind and thinking. The university I attended did an adequate job in molding my view of the world, but I must say that watching Star Trek: The Next Generation did more to open my eyes on the world we live in. Friendship, compassion, empathy, justice, defending those who have no voice, honor, history, acceptance, life, death, existence. All of these things took on more importance because of the behavior of principled characters on a TV show set in space. I remember watching The Next Generation on Saturday nights, 7 p.m. here in New Brunswick, Canada. Good Canadian kid, as John would say. And as soon as the show would end, Vince would call me. We'd discuss what we'd just seen, the philosophy of the show, the questions it asked, the moral fiber of the characters. Then we'd go out for a drink. I love that you had those questions or those conversations and then went and had a drink. I find your analysis of past and present Star Trek to be spot on. As you have said, Star Trek has had nothing to say for the past decade. The rebooted Star Trek films have not once made me stop to think about what the right thing to do would be. Discovery is a pure mess. Not once after watching Discovery have I reflected upon the reality of existence. Not once have I wondered, what would I do in that situation? Or what is the right thing to do? There is no breath of fresh air from Star Trek these days. You know, what's really interesting is that you say that the situations that they're in and the questions they're asking themselves, you don't ask yourself those questions because you would never be in those situations in the first place. So you're always asking yourself, why are these characters doing these things? Long gone are the days of Captain Picard standing up to Admiral Satie in the drumhead or telling Data to belay those orders after Admiral Heftel instructs Data to hand over Lal. We could go on and on. TNG, DS9, Voyager, the moments that made you feel as if there are good people in the universe are no longer present in Star Trek. I remember the good old days where a TNG episode would make me think for weeks, or even a few simple lines of dialogue that would squeeze your heart. One such exchange that comes to mind between Odo and Rurigan in the episode Shadow Play. Rurigan is the only real person living amongst holograms. Odo and Dax confront the old man about his feelings for a hologram. They tell him that they saw the way he attempted to comfort her when she was afraid. I didn't want her to get hurt, says Rurigan. If she's not real, what does it matter? Asks Odo. It matters. It matters to me. Why should it matter to you if a hologram cries? Because I love her. That last line is one of the most touching things I can remember in any version of real Star Trek. The actor playing Rurigan, Kenneth Tobey, nails it. Renee Auberjonois nails it. The writers nailed it. Questions of emotions, love, family, existence, all right there in a few simple lines in a seemingly meaningless episode. The acting, the writing, the directing, the creative teams behind those shows, I miss all of it. If I can interject here, again, you're dealing with the same kinds of things that you're dealing with in Blade Runner and you're dealing with in even Battlestar Galactica. Can a holographic life form be a life form? And if a hologram has demonstrable emotions of some kind, does that mean those emotions aren't real? And if you, as a human being, are having a reaction to a hologram's emotions, they elicit an emotional response in you, isn't that real or isn't it? And I think that's where that episode's going, and that kind of that's compelling science fiction right there. These days we have Discovery, a pointless show that has nailed nothing and is filled with characters you feel nothing for. Other than, I must say, Captain Pike, the only performance I thought was worth watching. And maybe Cole, a Klingon character that to me had potential but was killed off by the writer's room for no good reason. And not only are there no characters to hitch onto, but the beautiful mosaic of backstory and canon is being ignored or sometimes even intentionally changed for reasons that are unclear to anyone. I suspect even by the people changing them. I could not see myself jumping on the phone and calling Vince to talk about what we just saw in Discovery because there was nothing to see, really, other than spinning ships, roller coaster turbo lifts, and contradictions to over 50 years of mythology. These days, we do not have Star Trek. We have mediocre TV shows and movies with window dressing to make it appear as if they're part of the beautiful, thoughtful, reflective, and inspiring Star Trek that we all remember. Is it okay to love a hologram? Should a cybernetic life form be forced to hand over his offspring? When do you stand up to an authoritarian figure? If you program a hologram to feel pain, is it okay to hurt them? Do you interfere in another species' affairs if you know they are making the wrong decision? I dare the Discovery team to ask themselves these types of questions. Where are the great questions of life, as you recently put it? Where are the science-based concepts? Let me also briefly mention, as I wind up this meandering letter, that I'm hoping for the best but expect the worst with Star Trek Picard. I'm assuming the character, and again Star Trek as a whole, will be dumbed down. I fear they will ruin one of the best characters in not only science fiction, but any fictitious character ever dreamt up. As I often ask myself, what would Captain Picard do? I do realize, Mr. Burnett, that I really haven't said much in this message. I simply wanted to tell you that I appreciate feeling as if there's someone in the same boat I feel I'm in. Again, thank you, and please keep verbalizing and spreading what many of us Star Trek fans think and feel, as not all of us have the eloquent or reach you do. Well, thank you very much. You have well-structured arguments and criticisms of Star Trek, which I appreciate. I, as my letter makes obvious, am not nearly as eloquent in presenting my case for the present state of Star Trek. I think you sell yourself short, Darren. But that does not mean I am any less disappointed in it presently or hopefully for the future. Take care. That was from Darren McKinnon. Well, Darren, thank you for that letter. I appreciate that. Yeah, look, the reason that I, as a kid, liked Star Trek and the Twilight Zone were for the same reasons, because they made me think. It was always, well, what if? What does all of this mean? If this situation were to happen, how would I react? What is it? How do I feel about it all? I mean, even when you'd watch some Twilight Zone episodes would affect me for days. You watch something like Walking Distance, or even A Stop at Willoughby, or something like that. Or Eye of the Beholder, which is, of course, one of the great Twilight Zone episodes. But my first Twilight Zone episode that I ever remember seeing was To Serve Man. And when the end of that episode is revealed that these aliens, these technologically advanced aliens that solved all of our problems and basically are turning humanity into fat, happy individuals so they can eat us. That's the O. Henry ending. And I remember thinking, not only was I freaked out as a kid, I'm like, oh my God, I expected every ending would be like that. But the funny thing about Serve Man is you ask yourself, the question is, why would an advanced civilization do all of this, come all of this way, and find obviously and do that to us? Like, didn't they see any value in humanity at all? And it's a question that even now I keep thinking about. I keep thinking about these questions. To Serve Man, I'm like, would the Canamites? I mean, look, I didn't even know how stupid it was until later in my life that they called these Jerome Bixby called these characters Canamites. But I wonder, like, Why would a spacefaring race come all the way to another a civilization, a kindred civilization, and decide to eat them because we meant that little to them? You'd think that we would care, that they would care about us, but they didn't. But that's the thing about Star Trek, is I feel like all we're getting with modern Star Trek is a bunch of trope storytelling. It's just a collection of tropes we've seen a million times in other things. Hey, there's an evil cyborg. There's an evil AI. That's, it's Terminator or whatever you want to call it. There's not one really compelling thought. I mean, they did a few things that might be with Saru's race, but for the most part, very heavy-handed. It's as if these writers, and it's probably true, they weren't science fiction writers, so they haven't encountered these heady concepts. I mean, you go look at a movie. I look at a movie like whether it's Never Let Me Go that I talked about, or whether it's Her. I love the movie Her. Her is about the singularity, the coming singularity. What happens when AI becomes sentient and can think for itself? I mean, we want to believe that, it just turns into the Terminator and it's going to destroy the universe and kill all the humans. But Her doesn't do that at all. Her has a very compelling answer to what was going to happen. And I think that my problem with Star Trek Discovery is it feels as if it's, the worst kind of pulp sci-fi, and the stuff that it does, the window dressing or the respectability that it gets when it does a few things right, it just feels like it's pandering. It's the most obvious thing. It's strange to me. I don't get it. I don't understand. And it's because unless you're a fan of science fiction, and science fiction is a literary genre, you're never going to be able to write great sci-fi, because all you know are tropes. You don't know what real science fiction can be. And I think that's the problem with Star Trek. I mean, even Star Trek 2, what's so funny is Into Darkness, they want to rip off Star Trek 2, but it's ripped off badly. It's like it's a superficial rip-off of what Star Trek 2 is all about. Because Star Trek 2 does not necessarily hit you over the head about its no-win scenario idea, or the idea of mortality, or not playing by the rules, or any of those things. It's it gets into a lot of things in that movie. Again, Star Trek is an action adventure science fiction show, and it's very allegorical, and I don't see any of that in Star Trek. The new Star Trek, the last 10 years, has been very heavy-handed, very on the nose. There's nothing is implied, nothing is inferred. It's not great. The Richard says, thoughts on Tartakovsky's Clone Wars from 2003. I love them in so many ways, 3 minutes each. Well, for those of you who didn't see those were awesome. I mean, what I thought the Clone Wars did, what they celebrated, and I think I was missing from the prequel trilogy, and I'm sure that's where he got the idea, was just how badass the Jedi were. I love that Clone Wars series. I know Lucas was not a big fan of it, but I thought his series was great, and it really, one of the things about Star Wars that I wish the prequels got into more was it would have been really cool to see, and I've always thought, I am not a fan when people write in or tell me what their stories are that didn't happen. Wouldn't it be cool if such and such happened? Well, yeah, but it didn't. So basically what I'm about to say, speculation about what I would have done with Phantom Menace, was I would have approached it differently. I would have what I would have used as a template for Phantom Menace? It would have been a cop thriller. Whether it was Riggs and Murtaugh and Lethal Weapon, it's a cop thriller. Yeah, you've got Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, but basically they're space cops, rather than space mystics. I mean, these guys they're the long arm of the Jedi, are sort of, they're peacekeepers and all that, but basically they're also detectives, and they go try and uncover what's going on. And it would have been really interesting if the opening of the movie showed us Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon off on a mission, like a Bond movie, where they're off on this pre-title sequence mission where they're just badass Jedis. Maybe they stop a civil war, maybe they do something, and we would get to see the Jedis working at the height of their power. And you see them come back, and you see them working together, and you see Qui-Gon teaching Obi-Wan, and you get to see them for the very first time, badass Jedis. And then they go back and you meet the council, and the council then sends them on this mission to Naboo to find out like what's going on. We don't even know like they're blocked. Why are they blockading? Like they don't even know. They have no idea. Just go check it out. And then it becomes more of a mystery. It was a mystery, but a little bit different. I would have done it a little bit differently. But those kinds of things, I felt we got a lot of that with the Clone Wars, the original Clone Wars series, because the Jedi should be badass. Like I always thought they were. I was like, ooh, I fought with your father in the Clone Wars. I mean, I in my mind, the Jedi, and it's not. We got to see Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan being a badass or badasses in the Phantom Menace, but they were fighting these robots and droids. Like they weren't fighting anybody. I mean, there's one Sith Lord. Like, isn't there anybody that wields? There's lots of Jedi. Why aren't there people who are Force sensitive? Why aren't there whole groups of Sith warriors that are out there and they're like bad dudes? Why are there only 2 Sith? You know, why aren't there people that use the dark side of the Force for personal gain? And they're all over the place. And that's what the Jedi have to deal with. It just, I really liked and appreciated that in the Clone Wars that we got to see that. And that's what I think the great strength was. The Jedi were badass and cool. Mark C says, I'm reminded of the DS9 episode, The Begotten. I felt the crushing blow of Odo trying to help only to fail and the gift he received from his efforts. Yeah, again, you know, you go back and you look at the Deep Space Nine, especially as it moved through its 7 seasons, got to be surprisingly sophisticated on so many different levels. I mean, even the Luis Kai Wynn and Ducat in disguise, watching their relationship. I mean, there was so much going on, so much intrigue. I mean, it wasn't as good as even it could be because it was still in the Star Trek format and they still had to stick to it. But it gets to be surprisingly sophisticated, and they look at so many different areas, and they tell so many different great stories, and it was great. It was great, and I miss that with Star Trek. I miss seeing. I just feel that the people that are writing Star Trek right now, they're just not very smart. I think that's what I mean, they might be personally smart, but they're not. Their writing is not smart. And I feel like, God, have you ever read a science fiction book? Like here's the thing. Just go read some of the great science fiction and rip it off. I mean, I don't advocate stealing. I don't. But read a book. Go read a hard science fiction novel. There's a million concepts in, you know, the Snow Crash. You know, one of the great cyberpunk books ever written. But the idea of, I'll tell you something. When I learned how to edit non-linearly, when I started, it was 95. And I started... What's wrong, Gilbert? Gilbert's out there barking. Isn't it great when he barks like that? But anyway, when I started editing non-linearly, part of what Snow Crash is all about is it's about a length. Oh, it's our landscapers. That's why Gilbert is barking at them. But it was a language virus. And so what it was doing, it was changing the structure of your brain. And when I started editing non-linearly, because before, when I took editing courses and as a kid growing up editing, you're always thinking about what comes next. Because when you're literally taping film together. Gilbert, come here. You want a cookie? That's just the landscapers, buddy. You're okay. So I was thinking linearly because I was editing. I'd edited arcade, tape to tape. So you never thought when you're editing film that you could jump around in a project because you couldn't. And I had never edited digitally before. And suddenly when I was editing on an Avid, and I started out editing at this ad agency, I was editing commercials, I didn't have to think linearly about editing anymore. I could jump around if I wanted to change the beginning or change the end. I could do it instantaneously. So my entire idea of editing changed in my mind. The whole idea of how does one edit, and my idea that I'd grown up with, that I indeed had gone to school with, it had all changed. It had all altered because of Gilbert, please don't bark anymore. You want a cookie? Here, you want a cookie? Look. I bet Tallulah will come. Oh, they're not. Can't even get them with cookies. But anyway, it just changed my whole thinking. Oh, they are coming. All right, well, boys and girls. You've been good. I know the landscapers are here. You gonna come up here, Gilbert? You coming up? All right. How about that? Okay. You want a cookie too? Have a cookie. Anyway, you know, you guys haven't seen Gilbert and Tallulah. They've been in absentia for a while here. There you guys go. Yes, I know the landscapers are here. But anyway, so what I was saying is that as a science fiction where I was going with all this was as a science fiction concept, the structures I kept thinking about Snow Crash. That as I learned to edit non-linearly, my whole idea about language and the language of editing, the cinematic language of editing, and how I thought about editing, you start from one place and you move through it, changed. And literally how I thought about editing, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I could tell it was altering the structure of my brain, because how I thought about editing was no longer on a straight line. It was three-dimensional. I could zip in and out. And I'm like, that was something I was thinking about Snow Crash the whole time, Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, because it dealt with that. What happens when the deep structure of your brain is being restructured by new thoughts? Well, why don't the writers of Star Trek Discovery just read the 10 best science fiction novels of the last 10 years, or every year for the last 10 years, the 100 greatest, and just go mine ideas in those books for stories? I mean, it seems like the obvious thing that they could do, but they don't. Anyway, sorry, I was totally sidetracked dealing with the dogs barking. I apologize. But let's see. Now I've got more letters, and I haven't been getting through them. This is interesting. Okay, I like this. This episode, quick one, comes from Roberto Suarez. Robert, I appreciate your recent comments about Disney doing a good job of bringing the Star Wars movies to Disney Plus service at 4K resolution. However, the versions in the service are the post-special edition versions, not the original films. How do you feel about Disney Lucasfilm not giving fans the option to see the original versions of the movies at this level of quality? Well, Roberto, let me tell you, I think it sucks. For me, it's very bothersome, because I loved Star Wars, and for 20 years, up until 1997, Star Wars was one way. I mean, even in my lifetime, they altered Star Wars because it was just Star Wars. When the crawl came, there was no episode. It is a period of civil war, rebel spaceships striking from a hidden base of won their first victory over the evil Galactic Empire. I mean, that was what you saw. There was no A New Hope. So Star Wars has been altered throughout my life, but other than adding A New Hope to it, for the most part, it was something that was unaltered for 20 years. And I felt the alterations to Star Wars didn't work in the special editions. And it bothers me that I mean, I've had them all. I've owned them all. They've been released. The original versions were released. The Laserdisc masters were released to DVD. I still have my THX Laserdiscs of the original versions. You know, and I do have the fan-produced despecialized versions and the 4K -1 version of Star Wars, which is a recreation of the original version. I have all of those things. But I think that it's George Lucas's wishes. When Disney will eventually release the original versions of the films, and I would like to have them that way, because I don't think, especially Star Wars, I think has been very much hurt by the special editions, the Jabba edition, the fact that Mos Eisley Spaceport is no longer this like horrible East Texas truck stop. It's now Mos Eisley is this sprawling megalopolis with Jawas and Rontos and people all over the place, and the verisimilitude is out the window. And the funny thing about Star Wars is the fact that it worked so well without having digital effects. And I think as soon as you see digital effects in Star Wars, if they wanted to do things like clean up the space battles or something like that, clean up the matte lines, I don't have a problem with it. But you're intercutting CG. And in the case of the special edition, CG that is not even cutting edge CG, it's older CG. It doesn't work. Like when I watch the movie, I'm like, this doesn't work for me. It shatters the verisimilitude of the film, which is really a bummer. I mean, it really is a bummer. And I hope they do. But right now, I don't see that happening in the near future. I'm just happy to have the movies in 4K, and it's great to see the 20th Century Fox logo and the fanfare put back. I very much appreciate that, but it does bum me out. It really bums me out that those are not available. But you know what? I didn't expect them to be honest. I did not expect them to be there. So, but it's such a weird thing. It's such a weird thing to have grown up as a huge Star Wars fan and to have these movies your whole life and then have them changed starting in 1997. It's such an odd thing. Rick Berg is here. He says, here's a story you can write about. Why droids have restraining belts and bolts. Why droids have restraining bolts and the droid rebellion. Yeah, I mean, again, it's very interesting that I think the idea of droids in Star Wars is somewhat muddled. The idea of like, I don't understand. There's a droid army that uses binoculars. Like, when I saw that in Phantom Menace, I'm like, really? Why do droids have eyes like that? And why do the battle droids? It's so weird to me. Again, I did not feel that way in Star Wars. Like when you first meet C3PO, okay, protocol droids look like Maria from Metropolis. I get that, and they have eyes, they have faces because they're mostly used by humanoids. So they look vaguely humanoid. Why wouldn't people do that? I would imagine they would. And there's sensors or whatever. I never felt that was one of the things about Star Wars that I thought was so great. Whereas an astromech droid does different things. Like a protocol droid's what a protocol droid is supposed to do is work as a translator, work as an assistant to a diplomat. I mean, you get it. You understand, okay, he's a protocol droid. I'm fluent in 6 million forms of communication. All right. Well, R2-D2 is not that. Like an astromech droid becomes part of a spaceship, whether it's a X-Wing or now we know a taxi cab or speeder. I mean, all of these things, it all made sense. Like in the Star Wars universe, they might not have like said all these things explicitly, but you got it. You never went to yourself like, well, wait a minute, I don't understand this at all. But when you get into Phantom Menace, you've got droid control ships and you've got you've got battle droids and soldier droids and all of these things. And I get it. But the first time a battle droid used binoculars or whatever, a viewer, whatever it's called, I was like, why? If they need to see, if they don't have radar or sonar or whatever, if they need to see, why don't you just build them with ocular implants that can scan miles away on the horizon? It's such a weird, and that was for me, Star Wars completely. Forget about Jar Jar or the Gungans or whatever. There is no verisimilitude in the Phantom Menace. I mean, Star Wars to me had verisimilitude. I believed it for everything that was in there. I never asked myself or questioned, but not with Phantom Menace. And as we've moved forward in the Star Wars universe, I feel that what we've lost. I don't believe Starkiller Base. When I saw Force Awakens, I'm like, wait a minute. None of this makes any sense at all. Like the Death Star can move if you're in space, you can go 365 degrees in any direction. Why does Starkiller Base have a weapon? Its primary weapon is only built around the horizon. Well, what if you want to shoot something if you're here and the weapon's here, what if you want to shoot something in this direction? You can never hit it. Like, why does it look like this? It made no sense to me. But anyway, yes, to answer your question, I want the original versions of Star Wars back. Why can't we have them? Why can't I have nice things? Oh, that's not even your question. You're talking about why droids have restraining bolts, Rick. Yeah, I don't understand all that. I mean, I guess I understand, like in Star Wars, when they have the restraining bolts, when the Jawas put the restraining bolts on R2 and 3PO, it's because they don't belong to them. They've ripped them off. They've stolen them from somewhere. They rounded them up in the middle of the desert and they put the restraining bolts on them so they can control them from leaving. And that makes sense, but it's sort of strange. Like if you bought a droid, they're in your service. I don't think that droids would necessarily want to leave. I don't know. That's pretty interesting. And the droid rebellion I would think that somebody must have a switch somewhere where if droids were going to rebel, but that would be interesting. Did they do episodes of the Clone Wars for that? I don't know. They probably should have. That's a really good idea. But who knows? This letter, this is a good letter. Ian Samuels, one of our old pillars of the community. I don't mean he's old, but he's a pillar of the community. Writes a lot. And I like that. You know what? Ian Samuels writes in. This is a letter that I think people need to. Again, if you want to, the philosophy of this channel sums up. Ian did a good job of summing this up. Rob, we do indeed live in exciting times. That's what I always say. I don't remember being so excited for as many franchises at once. We have 2 adaptations of War of the Worlds, both good. We have HBO's The Watchmen, 4 episodes. In my opinion, it's great, and I'm excited for more. We have His Dark Materials, 2 episodes in, and I think this is also great, and it's also got me very excited. And we have The Mandalorian, after the first episode, which I thought was also great, and has also got me excited. I don't remember a time when there were 3 running TV shows that I was enjoying and was this excited about. And this is on top of the 2 War of the Worlds series, and there's a Star Wars movie due out as well. No matter what others' opinions is of Disney Star Wars, I am excited for the rise of Skywalker. What a great year. Ian Samuels. Well, Ian, damn it, son, you nailed it. I mean, for all the bitching and moaning and complaining we do about all these things, I mean, I still haven't decided whether or not I like Watchmen or I hate it. I'm on the fence. I mean, I have a lot of theories, but I don't think Watchmen. I don't know why everything has to be part of a mystery box. Like the whole show is a mystery box. Just tell me what's going on. Tell me a story. It's withholding the story. It's different when you're withholding a mystery and you're traveling with a main character who is uncovering a mystery. You're following them because they don't know, and you're seeing the story through their eyes. Well, now there's just a bunch of stuff happening that is all obfuscated on many different levels, and you have no opportunity. Like the characters are never going to understand or uncover what's going on because they have no idea what's actually going on. And so it's just when they choose to reveal these things to you and the characters can go, it's very, I feel like our main characters that we're following are not really doing anything. They're just reacting to stuff. And I feel that isn't great. That's not great characterization. Like for instance, we're 4 hours in, and clearly Dr. Manhattan has taken Ozymandias, Adrian Veidt, and trapped him. Well, okay, if that's the case, from the first time we've seen him, and if we're watching a year pass after every episode or whatever, why is that a mystery? Is it not interesting enough that he's already been trapped? And it's that same Westworld philosophy. I watch this stuff and I feel like, oh, okay, you're deliberately holding back what should be fairly obvious plot information so you can reveal it to me later, and I'm supposed to have my mind blown. But in a way, I feel it's cheating. It's not really good storytelling. It's not like you're watching a great mystery that is there's all this stuff. Everything about it is a mystery. Let's just keep adding layers of mystery to it. It's very Lost in that way. We're going to add all this stuff. Watchmen didn't do that. Watchmen took its cues more from, you saw flashbacks and all that, and you were being told stories, but each story you told, it was all part of this grander narrative, and you understood where you were going. You didn't quite understand what the plan was, but you saw the pieces of it all coming together. I feel like Watchmen just keeps adding, it just keeps throwing this stuff. Let's throw more stuff up. But I will say this, I'm enjoying watching it. And as somebody who's read The Watchmen countless times, I do find that I'm enjoying what's going on. I just wish that it was playing a little bit more, it was more honest with the audience. But then again, is Damon Lindelof even capable of doing that? Anyway, I don't know. But Ian, you're right, sir. We live in great times. Things are good and awesome. And we're getting we're always getting awesome stuff. There's always cool stuff. And it's not just the programming we're getting some really great movies. I mean, The Good Liar and Ford v Ferrari open this weekend. How great. Or Le Mans 66, if you live anywhere else in the world. I mean, how great is that? we're getting great stuff. And I'm very happy about that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the Richard is here again. And thank you for supporting the channel, the Richard. IG line droids are simply badass. One of my favorite things in The Mandalorian was seeing IG-11 and how he moved. They really did a great job of making IG droids badass. I love that. I thought it was so cool watching him. It wasn't just the scene we saw in the trailers, but him walking around. I mean, I would love to see an IG droid take on a Terminator, although I think an IG droid's probably a lot less. I think a Terminator could probably take him, but it was still pretty cool. Thank you, Mando. No one will ever make fun of stick bugs ever again. Don't tick off the pencil-shaped creatures. I will not tick them off. I've always kind of loved that. If you read, I think it was in Tales of the Bounty Hunters that IG-88 was about to take over. Was it the Death Star 2? And then it blew up. I love that story. I think it was IG-88. I don't remember. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this brings a close to Robservations, episode number 275. I want to thank everybody here. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel, supporting me. And we're coming down to episode 300. We're coming down to it. I want to remind everybody to go to the website. I mean, people are going to the website. There's a bunch of like 3-word reviews of The Mandalorian. People love those 3-word reviews. I forgot to keep pushing all that. Remember, if you go to the website and you comment on anything, you're entered into a weekly drawing for a bottle of Lucky Tiger all over body wash, head to tail body wash, which is always so funny to me. I'm a big proponent of washing the tail with body wash, if you know what I'm saying. And it's all good. So that's a great thing. The website is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you know what? If you want to reread your letters, they're usually all up there, the ones I read on the show. So check those out. And it's all good. I want to thank my moderators, the new ones, my new moderators, Louis Yu, and of course, Geordie Lyons. I hope they're not sick of doing this. And then my old school, I got Terry, the Sheriff of Nottingham. I've got Detective Jim. I got Greg Smith, builder of houses. And of course, still the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden, who is now the mayor of Riverdale, 2 consecutive terms. Amazing. He's here too. I don't know if he's here today, but if he is here, thank him. And I want to thank most of all you for watching the show. And now I've come to the end of Robservations. And as I always say, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to everybody, have a better day. And I'll by the way, I'll be back on, I'm not on John Campea tomorrow, but I will be back on my show. I promise.